Hello, folks. Welcome to Inside the Marble Palace. I am Murray Mandrick. I'm the political columnist for the Regina Leader Post. With me today, a whole host of people because we have a lot to cover. Lynn Giesbrecht from the Regina Leader Post, Phil Tank, and God bless having the name Phil Tank because it's easier to say, and I'll tell you why I'm having difficulty, because I'm going to finally try to pronounce Zak's name right. I've been calling him Zak Vescera, but it's Zak Vescera. How's that? I know I screwed it up again.
I'll give you passing marks on that one.
Thank you, Zak. My apologies once again. I just cannot roll an R. Folks, this has been a incredible week. I'm hoping that you two from Saskatoon will free us, who are imprisoned in Regina right now, because we have restrictions as per announced by Premier Scott Moe on Tuesday, unlike anything I think we've seen pretty much since the start of this pandemic. So maybe, Lynn, you're in Regina. You were at the press conference yesterday. Please go over what was announced and how it's going to affect Regina immediately, I guess immediately until April 6th. And actually, some of them don't even come in immediately. Some of them Saturday. But I'll let you explain, Lynn. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so we're basically going back to the beginning of the lockdown in many ways, which we have not seen since then. So yeah, starting immediately, household bubbles are limited to your immediate household only again, so no inviting friends over, which only loosened up a couple weeks ago, and now we're going back into immediate bubbles. People living alone can bubble with one other household as they could before, so that people aren't going start craving mad alone in their house. Bars and restaurants are closing in-person dining again, so takeout and delivery only there, which we have not seen in a really long time. Retail restrictions did not change, though, so those are staying open with limited capacity. Churches are staying at 30 people capped, whereas the rest of the province, they're at 150 now if they have that much space. Youth sports are also not changing at all, so that's not happening. But places like libraries, science centers, museums, galleries, all of those are having to shut down again. So, yeah, a lot of changes there for Regina.
And some of them are starting immediately. Some of them related to restaurants after the weekend. Was there any explanation as to why there would be a delay with some things like restaurants and bars, and why other things were more immediate, Lynn?
There wasn't any official answer given. It seems the assumption is just that they have a heads up that they can figure some things out, have a little bit of warning. Yeah, so starting Sunday, that's when Premier Moe said Saturday at midnight. It's actually Sunday at midnight because midnight marks the next day, so there's a little bit of confusion there. But so starting Sunday then, bars and restaurants have to close in-person dining, and that's when all the libraries and other venues like library. I already said libraries. Yep. Like science centers and stuff like that have to close. So
yeah, bowling alleys, arcades, all the places I hang around. Phil, before we get into why, and there's very serious reason why, because the new variants are something that we just absolutely need to talk about, and we need to talk about how the government's trying to combat this. But I'd really like to get a sense, starting, I guess, with you, Phil, as to what the reaction seems to be in Saskatoon, maybe elsewhere in the province, because one thing that I sort of encountered already is people are absolutely shocked that they've had to do this, particularly after just 2 weeks ago when the government decided to lessen restrictions. Is there that sense in Saskatoon that there is a bit of shock at what's going on in Regina, and maybe a bit of fear that it's going to spread to other jurisdictions in the province?
Yeah, I found it. I mean, it's, I've posted this on Twitter a couple of times. It's kind of a tale of two cities, right? Regina's at its highest point now with active cases in so far in 2021. Saskatoon is below 200 active cases for the first time since late October. So, we're doing quite well. And in the other zones in the province too, there isn't a zone that is above 100 active cases, and that's for the first time since October 20th. I think one of the things I found interesting was that there's going to be electronic signs on the highways outside of Regina warning people not to enter the city, which almost sounds like a plague city from the Middle Ages. If I can make a off-color joke, maybe the $1.8 billion spent on the Regina bypass is finally going to prove to be worth it. So that's, that's kind of something that strikes me. And of course, when we had active cases far lower in La Loche, there was a travel ban to the whole northern half of the province, unprecedented in the province's history. So I think some people maybe from La Loche are saying, why are we not imposing a ban on travel to and from Regina as opposed to an advisory?
Oh, can you explain a little what you mean by active cases far lower? You're talking about total cases, obviously, as opposed to percentage of people in terms of this. So just so people can clearly understand.
Yeah, I mean, active cases. I just happened to notice the other day that there wasn't a zone above 100 active cases outside of Regina and Saskatoon, and that's for the first time since October 20th. Because of course we've seen all these spikes in some of the northern ones, which of course, when you take population into consideration, 100 active cases up north is higher than, it's a higher concentration than 200 cases here. So, I mean, the variant, I found the way that province is reporting on variants to be confusing. I mean, they're reporting confirmed cases, active cases, and then yesterday they started calling them lineages confirmed by, testing. I think there's a lot of confusion about, and there's hundreds of them now, really. I mean, I'm not sure what the percentage of presumed cases that don't wind up confirmed is, but it seems to be pretty high so far.
Can you speak to the variants, Zach? Because a lot of people are rather confused as to why we are more concerned about this new variant than we were about the initial outbreak, particularly in light of vaccinations that are going on in Regina. So, what do you know about the transmission of this variant and why there seems to be a sincere concern among health officials, among public health experts, as to the transmission of this versus the original variant?
I think part of the confusion about variants just stems from the word variant. When you talk about a variant, it almost sounds like you're talking about a flavor of ice cream. What this actually is a type of mutation that is making the virus more transmissible, meaning someone who is sick is likely to give it to more people than the original. And as we now know, some of these variants are also more deadly. That is, you are more likely to die if you get sick with them. When you explain it like that, it becomes pretty clear why health officials are really worried about this, because it's basically like last March, but on hard mode. You have to do more to keep the transmission down if you want to stop it from overwhelming your health system. People are more at risk, and generally everything just becomes a little bit more difficult. The difference from last March is that we have an ace up our sleeve in the form of vaccinations, which do still protect against most of the variants. Some of them might be able to evade some of those defenses, but it looks like it's going to be a pretty sure thing that vaccines are going to bring an end to this pandemic at some point. But then there's another challenge, which is population fatigue. Because we've been doing this for a year, we're really familiar with some of the tools to stop variants and the coronavirus from spreading, but we're also really tired of doing them. One professor I talked to for a story earlier this week brought up something that Lynn kind of touched on, which is that once you loosen measures like we did a few weeks ago and then reimpose them, it feels like you're taking something from people. And I think people who work in policy are very conscious of that. People in healthcare are really conscious of that. They know that compliance is not going to be as high as it was last year. So they have to get creative and really try to rally people one last time in the face of these variants to keep those numbers down.
Lynn, you were in the room, and that's an interesting point Zach raised, because I sensed when I was watching it on TV, and not all of us can be in the room once again because of what we're all going through right now, but you had the pleasure, punishment of being in the room. I sensed watching the premier that this was weighing a little more heavily on him than other announcements, which it obviously would because it's of its severity. But I don't think he really wanted to be there that particular day, and I don't think he really wanted to be saying that. How did that message in your mind come across more so than other news conferences that you've covered? And you've covered several of these premiers' news conferences by now.
Yeah, I think it's just that. Like, this is not a place anyone wanted to be right now, obviously. And especially because Premier Moe had been so excited to see that household bubble grow a little bit, even just like that was a huge thing for him for fighting mental health in the province. Like he just wanted people to be able to see each other, even just like super limited quantities like that. And now to see that come back again just a few weeks later, I think is really tough for him to announce. And even Dr. Shahab said, like, these are really tough decisions to make, right? Like, no one wants to see this happen, but Regina's at a place now where it has to. And like NDP have been calling for more measures for weeks, and doctors have been calling for more measures for a long time in Regina specifically, because it's a little bit nuts. Like Regina went from 2 cases of the variant in early February that officials believed they had no close contacts to like 763 as of yesterday. So that's a huge growth in not very long. But yeah, it's crazy.
There's 2 things that absolutely drive me nuts covering it, and I get to say this a little bit more freely than maybe you do as reporters, but one of which is those that are so eager to gloat that the premier wasn't right in the first place. See what he had to do. Look, isn't this horrible? He must be this, that, and the other thing, blah, blah, blah. As Lynn said, I think this is very much troubling to the premier and everything else. But equally annoying is those that think because I donate to this political party or I vote for this political party, that entitles me to some level of expertise I don't have, or some level of opinion that isn't merited in terms of this conversation and really isn't adding to this conversation. I think the premier is pressured by both sides right now. And I guess maybe I'll start out with you, Phil. I don't know if you can sort of properly assess how that is playing out in his decision, but certainly we can sort of surmise by the cautious nature upon which he's sort of rolled everything out that he doesn't really want to go further. Do you think it's partly because of what you're hearing in terms of people's reluctance to this? You noticed in terms of the big rally, and we're still having big rallies in Saskatoon against any form of masking or lockdown or anything. Is that who, in your mind, the premier is combating when he has to make these announcements and tough decisions?
Well, I'd separate the people who show up at a rally and raise their fists in the air and scream, yes, that, when someone talks about globalization and globalism and the Globetrotters and anything having to do with globes. Yeah. And the people who are genuinely concerned about the effect this has on the economy, livelihoods, that sort of thing. It's such an imperfect science. I mean, I think we saw a study released that showed either this week or last week that showed, our restrictions throughout the pandemic were among the least stringent in Canada. And of course, for most of 2021, we led Canada in active cases, and I think we still lead in new cases over 7 days per 100,000 people. So it's not where you would want to be at this stage of the pandemic, right? I mean, you'd want to, but cases are rising in Canada too. So, and we're seeing, countries around the world reimpose lockdown. Germany's kind of struggling with that right now. Do we lock down for Easter? Do we do things? So these aren't unique to Saskatchewan. There's a perception that's
an important point, that we're not unique. Yes, sorry, go ahead, Phil.
There's a perception here that the Chamber of Commerce and the business lobby is really driving this, and I think they have been fairly deferential to whatever decisions the province makes. I wonder, if it's time now that we're looking at these variants, and we can see them in a few other is do what, like, say, Ontario has, and have different sorts of levels of restrictions, right? Because it seems like we might have a patchwork anyway, right? If there's variants rising in the zone with Moose Jaw in it, and the zone with Estevan and Weyburn in it. So I mean, I think it might be time. I'm not sure they're actually going to do this, but I think it might be advisable to do what Ontario did and say we're going to have different levels. You're in red zone now, and you can do this, 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 and this. Because you can just imagine if they have to announce different restrictions for, Moose Jaw today, North Battleford tomorrow. Oh, they're lifting in Regina now. Now they're in Saskatoon. That's going to be extremely confusing. Whereas if they have a color-coded zone or a color-coded, approach that says, okay, you're now here and you can do this, and you're now here and you can do that. We hope it never gets to that. Obviously, we want cases to go down, but just the way it happened in Regina, nobody would have predicted this a month ago.
It seems to be getting a little bit more complicated, and this is where I'm going to bring Zak in because you're a smart guy that can uncomplicate things pretty quickly. Within, as Bill talked about, the whole nature of what should be done where, there's a whole complexity related to what's going on right now because of the spread of the new variants and such. But even within the vaccines, we're having a tremendous amount of complication because the government has clearly tried to simplify this based on the vulnerability of people of age. Now we're getting down to, in Regina at least, people of, I think, 58, 59 that are being vaccinated with the AstraZeneca because we had an extra supply. That's clearly frustrated a lot of people, healthcare workers who are frustrated that they're not getting vaccines quickly enough and they're frontline. But in some of the work you've done, you've seen it in the more vulnerable communities. And having been in line, because once again, I'm old and I got vaccinated, but I'm not seeing a lot of people that are economically disadvantaged in those lineups for cars because A, they don't have cars. And it is kind of rather strange that that we seem to be focusing on, well, older people, people that tend to be slightly more affluent. Can you speak to the problem here and what would have been a better but maybe more complicated way for the government to have addressed it, to get to the vulnerable communities, even communities like New Canadians, where I suspect we're probably having a higher percentage of vaccine spread than maybe other places simply because of lifestyles and living in accommodations where many more per household.
Well, first, Murray, I have to object to your comment about me being a smart guy. That's just absolutely not true. And I'm also very happy that you got your shot, by the way.
Yeah.
I think the best way for me to do this is to actually give an example of my family. The first person to be vaccinated in my family was my grandmother. The second person to be vaccinated in my family will be my younger sibling, who is 21 years old, but they happen to work in a grocery store. And they live in British Columbia, which has taken a little bit more of a dynamic kind of way in how it's administering its vaccines. In BC, certain professions are prioritized for access to vaccines regardless of their age. Teachers who teach from K to 12, for example, firefighters and police. In Saskatchewan, we have a little bit of that. Some healthcare workers are priority, including paramedics. We have some prioritization of getting the vaccine out to certain congregate living settings, such as homeless shelters. But broadly speaking, we're focusing on efficiency and getting the vaccine to the place where it has the most potential to cause death. It's sort of a balancing act between do you focus on preventing the worst possible outcomes, or do you focus on inoculating the people who are most likely to get sick in the first place and maybe spread it along? There is zero way to please everybody in this arrangement because everyone pretty much I found thinks of themselves in being in a higher risk group than they might actually be. Many professions have said that we want to be on the list, but certainly there are some places in Saskatchewan's plan where we could point to a lack of communication at least, or maybe just a lack of a plan. For example, we have prioritization for people age 50 and up living in certain northern communities. A lot of Indigenous leaders in this province said, hey, why didn't you just specify Indigenous adults like other jurisdictions have done? That would have made it a lot more clear for us. I know there's some work happening between government and certain tribal councils on creating vaccine clinics to inoculate their populations, but Indigenous peoples in this province, one, have a shorter life expectancy than other people, and two, have a greater likelihood of having underlying health issues because of various socioeconomic factors. So I think there is a sense in Saskatchewan that maybe the squeakiest wheel isn't actually getting the grease in this equation somewhere. And again, you're never going to please everyone. I think with the AstraZeneca shots, what they realized they had to do is just get them out as fast as they could because they were also going to expire in early April. Let's not forget that. And the most efficient way to do that was to have a massive drive-through in kind of the central hub city, which is also the city with the highest infection rate right now. How is this going to play out in the next few weeks as we start to get those shots up to congregate living settings, as we begin to expand eligibility? I don't know the answer to that question, but I would hope this is something that's going to be on government's radar going forward.
I honestly wish we had more time today because there's so many questions people are asking me, asking all of us that need to be answered. But unfortunately, this is about it for today. I really do thank you, and I'm assuming the public does as well, for covering as much ground as you have in this particular podcast, because it's getting more complicated, and it's getting more complicated for us. It's getting more complicated for the people out there. So I just urge people to stay in and listen to these podcasts, listen to these smart people, and read what they say today. Lynn, Phil, Zach, thank you so much for today, and thanks for all your help. Take care.